Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. This is Primordial Paradigm, part dos, and we're going to be going deep dive on the gut microbiome science. Oh, one second, not advancing. Here we go. And here's just a little bit of a disclaimer before I continue. While I am a doctor, I am not your doctor, and this webinar is for education and information only. This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you heard or read or seen in today's webinar. But first, let's review. So if you guys have seen the first of the series, I went over the definitions of primordial and emergence. And I would just like to refresh your memory because this is really at the root or the foundation of my whole approach to gut health. And, for starters, primordial really does mean existing at or from the beginning of time. And that is precisely my point here with how I value and approach health and the gut microbiome. So these little critters have been the first living organisms on our planet. They have literally developed all of the biochemical processes known in nature. And now we use them in our bodies. And this idea of emergence, an emergent property can appear when several simple entities operate in an environment, forming a more complex behaviors as a collective. And, the bee pollinating the dandelion serving as a weed, but also as a medicine, I just think is a very fantastic metaphor for that. So all these microorganisms that live in our body, they have a role in our health, and they also have a role in causing disease, which is why we'll talk about the balance of that. And then the vagus nerve, and I don't really have a good picture for the vagus nerve. That isn't some anatomical description, but the vagus nerve is what conveys homeostatic responses and connects all of it, the gut, the brain, us as human organisms, to our emotions, to our experience. And remember, homeostasis is this biological need to restore balance. So if we tip the scale one way into stress, we have to find our way back to a sense of calm. And that's what homeostasis is. And then remember, this is the infographic that I created that really describes everything we're going to talk about in this whole Primordial Paradigm series. And today we're going to be focusing here at the top with the microbiome development. And we're going to be talking about mother's health and how that plays an important role. Prenatal stress, we'll get into that in part 3. And then birth mode, delivery, feeding, diet, medications, etc. And I can't wait. This is actually my favorite part of the whole series. So getting started here, the gut microbiome and all of these little critters, they are sentient beings. They take residence within us. And I always think about that sci-fi moment in Men in Black when that little cat has that necklace, and inside the necklace is an entire universe, right? And it has its own constellation, and it's just like that's exactly what's going on here inside our bodies. We are like a universe. We are the creator of this environment for all these little creatures to coexist in. And I typically don't have a fear mindset. I typically really have the mindset that everything is working for us and everything has a role. So that's going to come out, one of my biases here. I'm a very optimistic individual. So the human body is a donut, and we're literally a hole from mouth to anus. And everything that we eat, everything we breathe, everything we drink is really the external environment coming into contact with our environment. And so I think about the gut more like the skin, more like skin functionally than I do, say, like a heart or something like that. And it's home to many, many symbiotic organisms. Now, this is again my rendition of just how giddy and excited I get about bacteria and viruses, because really they are our ancestors. And like I said, they were the first living creatures on this planet. And as this picture here on the right shows, not only did we evolve from, potentially monkeys to Neanderthals to man, but now we're evolving into chronically diseased people, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, hypertension, cancers, and all of these medical diagnoses and problems are now being linked to this disturbance in the gut microbiome. It's pretty exciting. So, the gut has also been called our second brain or the enteric brain. And for those who aren't in medical related fields, enteric means gut or bowel. And so up here on the left of this picture here, it compares the brain to that of the gut, the different nervous systems. So glial cells, which are the supportive tissue of the neural network. And in the brain, there's 85 billion neurons, and in the gut, there's 500 million neurons. So there's not as many, but there's still a significant portion. And it's interesting because the not only the tissue types, but also their function is very, very similar. In fact, there is a gut blood barrier, just like there's a blood brain barrier, there's a blood gut barrier. And what science is discovering is that all of our neurotransmitters, well, the brain tissue does make some of them. The gut and the gut bacteria actually make a significant amount of them. And so, this interaction between what goes on in the gut and what goes on in the brain, and then how these different neurotransmitters convey effects, is just really fascinating to me. And we're going to learn a lot about that tonight. So, like I've been saying for many, many years, is that I get really excited knowing that 95% of serotonin is made by gut bacteria. When I was in medical school, that wasn't common knowledge, and that wasn't even that long ago. I was in medical school 10 years ago learning this information, and we didn't learn where serotonin was made or how to increase more naturally. Instead, what we were learning is that when you have depression, you likely would benefit from a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So, again, my whole passion for going into medicine all along has been about the discovery of finding health. And that's why I'm an osteopath, is because I like to find health. And the gut microbiome is a beautiful place to start thinking about your body and to start thinking about health. So, well, the gut has one motor nerve. A motor nerve is something that goes from the brain to a part of your body to convey action. I want to move my arm, so I move it. I get to move it without even really thinking about it. That's a motor function. So, while there's one nerve going from the brain to the gut, there's 9 nerves going from the gut back to the brain. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing. The guts actually have a lot to say, potentially even more than the brain has to say. So, we're going to kind of anatomically discuss the different layers of gut functioning. So, the gut is now known to be not only nervous tissue and connected to our nervous system, but it's also connected to our endocrine system and how our body creates and synthesizes and shares hormones in the body, but also our immune system. In fact, the largest collection of lymph nodes in the human body is in the gut tissue. And it's estimated anywhere from 70 to 80% of the body's lymph tissue is in the gut. And our microbiome is not just bacteria, but it's actually different types of fungi, or like yeast, viruses, many, 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 many viruses. In fact, many more viruses than bacteria are estimated to be in the gut at any given time. And then also parasites. All of these things interact with our immune system, endocrine system, and nervous system, and then back to the brain. So the next layer in this anatomy is the mucus layer. And the mucus layer is, I mean, it's just like the inside of your cheek. That's how I describe it to people. You can take your tongue and roll it around on the inside of your cheek. That soft, shiny, squishy stuff. There is a lining of, it's almost like goo. That's kind of how I describe it. Imagine it like goo, like gelatin. but it's the kind of the slimy, filmy layer, and this is called the mucus layer. And we know that in the stomach, if you don't have a healthy mucus layer, you're more vulnerable to stomach ulcers. Same thing in the small intestine. And this mucus layer literally lives on top of all of your gut cells and all of the little crypts. Remember, each little finger-like projection is a villi. So the mucus layer really lives on top of that. And it's important that we have a healthy mucus layer. That way we can help protect the underlying human tissue from toxins, acids, or just byproducts of fermentation. Our body is always, I don't want to say at war. I actually don't like war rhetoric in regards to health, but there's always some sort of natural element of conflict, right? You look out the window, you see a bird dive down, get a mouse, or a worm or something. So there's always this like food chain dynamic of something has to be something else's food. That is absolutely true in the body, and that's absolutely true in terms of these little microorganisms. They literally feed off of each other. The chemicals that they produce then help confer the health and growth of other different types of bacteria. So your body is home to this sort of natural landscape. And in order to protect your cells from the harm from any of those behaviors or activities or chemicals, toxins, acids, then it has to have a really healthy mucus layer. And then the enterocyte. So again, these little finger-like projections sticking up, those are the villi. The mucus layer lives really robustly right here on top of that. And then the gut lining, or the gut itself, that kind of surface area, it's only one cell layer thick. And so this is what an enterocyte kind of looks like in terms of a picture. The absorption of all of our nutrients and the digestion occurs right here at these little finger-like projections. In fact, the entire surface area of the intestines, if you were to take all those little finger-like projections of the small intestine and stretch them flat, I've heard estimates of 2 tennis courts or up to 1 entire football field. And when I hear those types of estimates, again, I just get really excited, because that is just how important digestion is. And that's how important it is for our body to really take in all of this information from our external environment, chew it, digest it, and then metabolize it. Tight junctions. These little yellow circles represent tight junctions. Now, they probably look different under an electron microscope, but for this schematic, this is actually very, very accurate. What they do is they actually link all of these cells together. And you want your enterocytes to be sticking and linked together, because by not having space in between the enterocytes, you again keep the byproducts of the environment, the toxins, the bad bacteria, undigested food, you keep that out. And so we're going to be talking a lot about leaky gut and what do these tight junctions mean. And so this is called the apical membrane because it's closest to the surface. This is called the basal membrane because it's closer to the basement. And this is called the lateral membrane. And so in the gut, we have transcellular route, so different chemicals. This would be like magnesium, or like the amino acid, like cysteine, would get taken across the cell this way, directly into the bloodstream. Or you have the paracellular route. The paracellular route is really the not preferred route, because you want tight junctions, and you want to be able to protect the body from getting undigested food particles, bacteria leaking across, or from those toxins that I keep talking about. So this infographic, I think, does a really good job describing what healthy gut function is, and again, the power of digestion. And just remember that the vagus nerve is what really drives and sets the state of digestion. And so when we can be calm and relaxed and present, and eating on a schedule that our body finds predictive for eating a meal, then we are going to have optimal digestion. The stomach acid is going to be present. The pancreas and bile are going to coordinate digestive enzyme efforts. And then we're going to have normal gastric emptying. We're going to have normal transit of the food moving through the bowels. And then we're going to be able to say, like a carbohydrate, digest it into all of its individual little starches so that these little sugar molecules can go across the cell membrane the way that they're really designed to do. Same thing here with protein. We have to digest everything into tiny little amino acids. And I love this concept of a food being a pearl necklace. And so it's up to your body and your digestive enzymes to break down the food into each individual little pearl. And so you don't want a system where you don't have a healthy mucus layer, or maybe you have disrupted tight junctions, and now you have bigger molecules of undigested food coming across. And when that happens, that's when your immune system starts to react. So down here, not only at the bottom, this picture doesn't really show it, but I'll show you another one. So this is the bloodstream, but right here in this basement membrane is where your immune system really resides and acts as a screen and a filter. All right. So again, this enteric immune system. So we've just kind of talked about in the lumen being the food that we eat, also some of those bacteria like probiotics, etc. There's also an outer mucus layer and then an inner mucus layer. And this is really delineated by having your own kind of immune system kind of being at the ready to cross above and below this enterocyte here so that it can act and respond. The outer mucus layer is really where your microbiome reside. And remember from Primordial Part 1, your individual gut microbiome is almost as unique as your fingerprint. And this is based upon your personal exposures, but also your immune system's response to those exposures. Pretty wild. So just to explain this a little bit further, these being the enterocytes, this being the transcellular transport of your immune system coming out to help protect you from any particular, again, war rhetoric is used a lot, invaders, right? So if you got, again, kind of more opportunistic or bad bacteria floating around, your immune system can come up and screen it. If you are also in a position where you aren't digesting your food appropriately, then your immune system will come up and start screening those larger molecules as well. This is a dendritic cell. And what studies have found is that they're called a neuropod cell, but basically you have your enteric brain at the bottom of your gut cells will send up a little antenna and literally sense the environment, what's going on, and then will send nerve signals back down to the rest of your nervous system. And your immune system will also catch some of these other invaders, bring it down, and then either do a couple of things. It'll either trap it and kill that type of bacteria in a means to protect you. It might then develop an immune response that correlates to a chronic immune response and something like autoimmune type reactions, which is common when people don't have the enzymes or the total milieu environment, the emergent phenomenon of autoimmune diseases. So dairy has been attributed to that. Gluten has been attributed to that. If you guys have been in the trenches of having your own, I just used war rhetoric, of having your own gut issues, maybe you've came across Dr. Stephen Gundry, who talks about the plant paradox. And in his explanation, he says that plants have protective mechanisms so that they don't get digested when they're eaten by predators, right? I mean, so we're out in nature, we're trying to eat these seeds and stuff, and they actually don't want to be eaten. I tend to think that food does want to be eaten because by us eating and then pooping out their seeds, we actually help spread kind of like an act of pollination. But again, there are certain protective mechanisms of plants. And so those protective mechanisms make them more inflammatory, harder to digest, harder to break down. And so if a person, again, doesn't have the right internal environment to do that, and then is eating a lot of foods that are difficult to digest, you can get an overactive immune response. There are theories upon theories and layers upon layers, and the reality is we're barely really just starting to scratch at the surface, but we are starting to see some definite defined trends that when you have a weak mucus layer, when you don't have a good bacterial diversity up here, your own inner bacterial diversity, which just means you don't eat a lot of plants and you don't eat enough fiber, and you have that layer of stress, which stress really weakens these tight junctions here between the gut cells, then yes, you're going to be more vulnerable to developing these internal relationships to plant and plant foods, dairy, etc. All right, the gut connectome. This is the neuropod. I love, 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 love this. This paper came out in 2015. So yes, the giant nervous system of the gut, same cell types as in the brain. They interact with the immune and endocrine systems, and then they help your body coordinate that autonomic function of digestion. And like I keep saying, but I'll remind you again, because I think it's very important, but 90%, or there's 9 nerves from the vagus going from the gut to the brain. That's what sensory means, or efferent. And then there's afferent coming from the brain to the gut in 10%. So the gut is constantly interacting with our nervous system. And then here, again, lumen being the inside of the bowel, the epithelium, this little brush border, the villi, and then this is an enterochromaffin cell, or an enteric glial cell. So you have this glial cell, and this is that neuropod, and it'll literally sense. It'll like put a little antenna up and be able to tell the entire nervous system what's going on in the gut. And the bacteria in the body have this really sci-fi abilities. And this is what is commonly being described as crosstalk. And so these bacteria have a telesensing, and I imagine viruses do too to some degree, a telesensing concept. So they can literally intercept signals from the host via being in the blood, being in the lumen of the bowel, all of our neurotransmitters, which there are over 100 identified neurotransmitters. Still, being a physician, I can only name, I don't know, probably less than 10. Serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, epinephrine, dopamine. I mean, maybe 5, right? So there's only a key handful of ones that we really focus on, but there have been over 100 different biochemical metabolite markers of human neurotransmitters. So bacteria will intercept these signals, and then that will, because of these neuropod cells and the interconnectedness to all of these different systems, trigger an immune response, trigger a nervous system response. One bacterial species can turn on greater than 100 genes based on one signal. And this has been proposed in studies looking at sepsis after a traumatic accident. Somebody breaks their leg, they have this major, major adrenaline rush. And that also plays into how the vagus nerve interacts with that. We can talk more about that in part 3. But let's just say we're just focusing on the leg, we're just focusing on the adrenal rush. The gut bacteria will literally sense this. And if the gut bacteria sense enough stress hormone where they think your body will die, they will then become more virulent. Virulent means that they become more infectious. Maybe they become harder to treat. They will get into your bloodstream. And I read an editorial by one microbiologist who said that bacteria are trying to always survive. It's just survival of the fittest. It's just nature happening inside our bodies. And so if the host is going down, these bacteria want to jump to another host so that they can keep on surviving. And there's key species that are more notorious for doing that, and that's Pseudomonas, Staphylococcus, a couple of the gut bugs as well, E. coli. This will then trigger all of the immune cells, which is listed right here. T regulatory cells, toll-like receptors, chemokines, cytokines. Cytokines might be something that is everybody's a little more attuned to because the coronavirus is causing a cytokine storm. So again, this is part of our immune system, and it's all triggered to help protect us because one thing then signals the next. I like to think of it as when I order something off of Amazon, I shop for what I want and I one click buy, and then 2 days later, it's magically on my doorstep. But when you really think about where did that product come from, who made it, how many hands did it touch, who had to make the label, who had to make the box, who had to design the product, who had to design that product's packaging, etc., right? It's this exponential effect. And that is really what's going on in the body too. There's many, many, many players all converging to help make physiology happen. Quorum sensing. This is when bacteria themselves secrete chemical signals that then communicate to other colonies. Pretty wild. And then I just want to take a minute here and go beyond food groups. So I've been studying nutrition since 2004. And tell you what, that was still when the food guide pyramid was present. We were told to eat 12 servings of grains, dairy, meat, etc. It's all BS. So let's go beyond food groups and let's talk about what the bacteria need to eat. And if you can take anything away from today's presentation, it's this: eat prebiotic foods. And recognize that every single plant is a prebiotic food, but it's the types of fiber and it's the different types of fiber present in these foods that really, really help feed a gut microbiome. I've personally tested my own stool 8 or more times, and I've done it seasonally. I've done it annually. I've done it while traveling and eating out more regularly than I would have liked to. I've done it under stress, and tell you what, my gut microbiome has never been healthier, more diverse, less inflamed than when I was eating out of my own garden a lot throughout the summer months. So, an avocado has 10 grams of fiber. Fantastic. I eat lots of avocados. Artichokes also have 10 grams of fiber. Chickpeas, split peas, lentils. Now, I recognize that if some people are having difficulty, maybe they have SIBO or something, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, they often feel excessive bloating and abdominal discomfort when they eat fiber. I have a few things to say about that, which I will save for a different, I'll save that for a different meeting. But keep in mind that in order to have a healthy ecosystem, you want as many different types of species of bacteria. And in order to do that, you need to feed them many different types of fiber in plants. So what I was going to kind of allude to is that even if you do have SIBO, by avoiding all of the plant foods, just so you can avoid symptoms, you're never really going to fully overcome the SIBO problem. Now, there are different ways to introduce different foods, but again, there's no prescription here. It's a personal choice, it's a personal journey. Um, and I do recognize that anybody who isn't eating a lot of fiber and then all of a sudden tries to eat a lot of fiber, you're going to be stinking up your house. You're going to be having tons of flatulence. But tell you what, it doesn't take very long, and your bowel movements are going to get so much better. You're going to have more energy. You're going to feel less hungry. Fiber is an amazing, amazing thing. I think it is food group number one. Yacon, this is a new vegetable for me. I actually just discovered it this past year, locally here in Corvallis. Peace seedlings, they grow yacon. Yacon is a root tuber that grows in the ground just like a sweet potato. And you have to dig it up and then cure it in a greenhouse for a few weeks. And you can eat it raw. You can eat it raw just like jicama. This plant tuber has one of the highest natural sources of inulin, which is why I mention it. And it's actually, that's what this little tuber is here on the cover of this inulin book. Inulin gets an honorable mention in my book, my not yet written book, because it has such a profound effect on increasing diversity of microorganisms in your gut. There's been a lot of infant studies on supplementing inulin in formula and having those infants then have a normal or near similar diversity, similar amounts of organisms as those who are breastfed. So if inulin can take an infant gut microbiome and make a formula-fed infant look like it was getting breastfed, inulin's getting an honorable mention from me. Big fan of inulin. Now, a probiotic is the bacteria itself. And these, if you consume them in the forms of fermented foods, if you consume them in the form of capsules, these are types of bacteria that have really evolved with us in the forms of food that we eat, but they don't actually take residence within us. So if you're going to be taking or eating probiotic foods, which I highly recommend, just recognize that you're not eating them so that they live in you. You can't just take it once and then expect them to be there even a few days later. I think of probiotics as, again, something humans have evolved with. We haven't always had refrigerators. We haven't always had pasteurization. And so even buttermilk was just raw cow's milk on the kitchen counter for a few days, and then it would start to ferment. You want to go make your sourdough bread. It's literally water and flour on the kitchen counter for 3 days. These bacteria live in our air. They live in our soil. In fact, soil um, and soil health is another thing near and dear to my heart. So I think as probiotics more as compost or as fertilizer for our gut. And so yeah, eat from your garden and have healthy soil. Now, a postbiotic. Okay, the biochemistry nerd in me sees this diagram and I get so excited. So I'm going to go over it very slowly with you. So a postbiotic, I think of that as what the gut microbiome or what these little bacteria, what they produce. If you think about what a human produces carbon dioxide when they breathe out. We produce urine, we produce sweat, we produce sexual organ secretions, and we also produce stool. So bacteria produce many byproducts of their existing. Breathing, eating, drinking, pooping, all of those things, bacteria make other chemicals as well. Turns out these chemicals that these bacteria make is what feeds our cells. And I wish we had more information about the prescriptive nature of butyrate, acetate, or propanoate. These are the three main short chain fatty acids that bacteria produce. There have been many studies saying that obesity or neurodegenerative diseases are deficient or even toxic in one or the other. And so the evidence isn't quite conclusive, at least not yet in my reading. There's many, many, many thousands of papers on this stuff to read. But I found this review to be very, very helpful. And so we'll start over here. Now, this is the lining of your gut. And these are your little gut cells. And what is on the other side here of your gut cells these are hormones. So GLP-1 or glucose-like peptide 1, peptide YY, and ghrelin. These are the hormones that, as an obesity or weight loss surgeon, my surgery changes. And so these are really important for regulating appetite and also regulating how freely our body can use fat for fuel. Down here, these are proteins and hormones that are important for maintenance of that barrier function of the bowel. Up here, this mentions immunomodulation. So these are the different immune cells. And then how does prebiotics, so eating those fibers, how does that impact all of these different things? So just by eating prebiotics, fiber, more and more fiber, what you're doing is you're actually improving the regularity of your bowels, not only through bulking, which is, again, historically all we were taught is that you eat fiber to bulk a stool. And I literally thought of it as just now my stool is more soft and full, right? Well, that is partly true, but you actually have that neuropod cell connecting to your brain, connecting to your nervous system, connecting to those autonomic things that actually regulate the bowel movement itself. So, how frequently are you having a bowel movement? What is the rate of motility, which means emptying and movement? Um, which is fantastic because you want your bowels to move quickly. Remember, I told you the beet test. You want to eat beets and you want them to come out within 24 hours. So regulation of bowel movements. Also up here, allergy prevention and immunomodulation. And this is really important, specifically when we think about what was our earliest days like. What were we fed and what were we exposed right out of the uterus. Here we talk about kidney disease, increasing absorption of calcium, reduced infection. So just by having a good concentration of these postbiotics, you actually regulate the pH. Now, bacteria and every cell in the body, every function, every enzyme, everything is a very pH specific thing, pH being acid or base. And so really probiotics, in my opinion, do a really fantastic job at regulating pH. And also when we eat fermented foods, when the bacteria are active, then you are already ingesting these butyrate, acetate, and propanoate in those therapeutic levels. Remember, nothing in biology is all or nothing. Nothing is turned on or turned off. Everything is bidirectional. Everything has a cause and effect. And think of it as like a pendulum swinging one way or the other. Remember, that was that hormesis thing in part 1. You can review that if you want. And then down here, talking about the maintenance of barrier function. That's really what we were just talking about, those tight junctions. And so how intact is the gut barrier itself? What else can I tell you? LPS stands for lipopolysaccharide, and lipopolysaccharide is just one of those bacterial products that causes inflammation in our body. And so LPS being one of those molecules that if we have a weak mucus layer, if we have broken cell junctions, LPS is going to cross and interact with our immune system and then trigger this inflammatory cascade. LPS is really at the root of obesity and metabolic disease, and probably a lot of other things. So anyway, go short chain fatty acids. I think we're going to be seeing new products come out, which are going to be a postbiotic supplement. So where do our microbes come from? The environment, and that really starts in utero. So really everything that your mother has been through has impacted you. In fact, having a cavity is associated with a 2 to 7 time increased risk of preterm birth, and that the amniotic fluid was previously thought to be sterile. Well, turns out about 50% of women so far studied have actually had cross contaminants from the mouth, from the genitals, from the gut. And so this is what science is trying to understand is this normal? And is this considered a healthy thing? Or is this considered like a red flag and a mechanism for maybe not so healthy of a birth and not so healthy of a maternal event? And then, so from when we're in utero, all the way down to mode of delivery. And I'm sure many of you, well, maybe not, maybe that's why you're here. Maybe many of you don't know this. But yes, the mode of delivery has a direct impact on our life as humans or your child's life for forever. And I just want to celebrate the fact that modern medicine can now keep premature babies alive as from a very, very, very young age, where previously we didn't have that ability, right? So it's a lot of these things should be celebrated, and I want to celebrate that. I don't want to ever come across like I'm anti C-section. But there are side effects, and I think studying the literature and acknowledging what these side effects are can also position us in a way where we can be better informed to then maybe make more corrective action earlier. And that's my goal. So mode of delivery, when we're born C-section, We just don't come into contact with the bacteria of the vagina or the bacteria of the rectum. So stool bacteria. And I know we live in a very sterile world, but coming into contact with mother's stool and mother's vaginal secretions and mother's skin is actually step number one at your exposure. And then gestational age. So the more premature we're born, the less ready we are developmentally to take in food into the gut. So really, babies, their guts aren't even really mature enough to handle digestion until they're full term. Yet when a baby is born premature, we have to feed them. So we give them a little nasal tube and they're given a little formula. Now that formula is different than what you would give a full-term baby, but it's still stomach and intestinal feeding. So what do we know about that? Well, we know that babies born C-section, babies given formula, typically they get an overactive immune system because of all of these other factors that I was just explaining to you. And then postnatal factors. So once you're born, once you're home, whether you're fed breast milk or formula. Now, sometimes formula can be the healthier option depending on the health of the mother. But oftentimes, in the most perfect world, which my vision for the future is that we have more well-informed parents and more well-informed women, and we have access to good healthcare and access to good food. Because when people are given an opportunity to eat more plants over canned food, packaged food, etc., then yes, your breast milk is fantastic. Being born in your geographical location, third world countries, city, super sterilized, whether you're on a farm, exposure to dirt, exposure to animals. So believe it or not, but exposure to a dog or a cat is actually believed to be immunoprotective because you get more diverse organisms interacting with your body than to not be around a pet. Family members, different host interactions, again, maternal diet, and then weaning. There's recently been a press release suggesting that if a baby is fed solid food before the age of a year, then they're more likely to develop obesity. Again, literature these days is being pumped out so quickly. And for every new sort of discovery or correlation, there is equally some other level of research to dispute it. So I don't like to just read headlines or go off buzzwords, but I will bring them up from time to time, and I'll do my best to read the literature really good for you. So yes, delivery mode impact. I just gave a very wordy description on the most previous slide, but skin to skin contact is really important. There's now microbiome and microbiologists advocating, and actually there's a lot of midwives and OBGYNs advocating too, that you don't bathe your baby right away, that the vernix in which they're born with is actually protecting them from, again, their immune system and their skin. Because just like the gut and the brain, your skin actually has a pretty robust immune layer under it as well. And then breastfeeding, and then, kind of the opposite being true when you um, have a preemie. And again, that's the feeding tube going into the preemie's body. And um, it's amazing. It's amazing that we can keep premature babies alive these days. So that first microbiota that a baby makes contact with does several things. And this is really teeing up your immune system to then have memory, react, and develop over time. So that first colostrum, which comes out of a woman's breast within the first hours of delivery, builds a healthy mucus layer and enhances that barrier function. Remember, that barrier function is really defense number one. And then development of this gut-associated lymph tissue. And this is something that happens over several first years of life, is your body's constantly growing and developing and taking shape. Stimulation of secretory IgA, that's just another one of the named immunoglobulins. And it's one of the first ones that kind of comes on the scene when we're young children. And then it tries to create an anti-inflammatory environment. And this is really important because if we have a pro-inflammatory environment right out of the gate, then that's when we're going to be more susceptible to disease, upper respiratory tract infections, and allergic type reactions as young people. And then early immune activation, which is essential for maturation of all these physical symptoms. So again, here, this being the gut lumen, bacterial metabolites or postbiotics, short chain fatty acids, that's like that butyrate and propionate. These would be like little particles of food. These would be like little particles of bacteria. Calprotectin, this is actually a protein that we can check as clinicians to determine if you're at risk for inflammatory bowel disease or like celiac disease. And then these are different types of bacteria that are present, and then how your immune system interacts. And then again, these tight junctions. So these tight junctions are, again, incredibly important. And it's believed that when we're born premature, we don't necessarily have proper tight junction development yet. So I just wanted to kind of refresh everybody about the difference in these different microbial environments, and really like the host factors, which is how much stomach acid am I making? How much oxygen am I swallowing? The presence of oxygen within the bowel after gastric bypass, which is a surgery I do quite commonly, is a known mechanism for how the gut microbiome changes after surgery, because the stomach has been so rearranged. When people who have had gastric bypass are now swallowing more air and it's getting directly into the small intestine, that is actually shifting the pH and the respiration functions of the bacteria. So the presence of acid and the presence of oxygen in the stomach slowly wanes and decreases in the small intestine, where in the colon, the bacteria there have nothing to do with oxygen. And then all of these things interact with our nervous system to dictate, and also our gut microbiome to dictate how well or how quickly does our bowels empty. What is the mucus layer like? What is that mucosa and that barrier function? How are our enzymes being secreted and made? And then these antimicrobial peptides, which were mentioned before. And to be honest, now that I'm doing this webinar for the second time, I'm like, oh, I need to learn more about antimicrobial peptides. I actually don't know anything about them. I don't know how they're made, where they come from, what part of the immune system are they in. So I will follow up on that. And then secretory immunoglobulin A, which is, again, that first really primarily gut-derived screener for how does our body respond to what's foreign and what's not. And then these extrinsic factors, which is diet. So that's pre and postbiotics. Antacids. Antacids are useful when you have a stomach ulcer. However, long-term use, they just wreak havoc. They change the pH of the upper GI tract, which then changes the pH. And then different types of bacteria that would normally grow near the colon start growing up in the stomach, or near the stomach in the foregut. And this is one of the mechanisms behind SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is the chronic use of PPIs. And there have been studies now documenting that just 2 weeks of PPI use, you're going to induce a SIBO-like picture. Same thing with opiates, narcotics, oxycodone, hydrocodone, etc. 2 weeks of opiate use is causing SIBO. I know so many people that I encounter in my medical day-to-day life, and they're on both of these medicines altogether. Antibiotics definitely affect bowel bacteria without question. The ability for a person to rebound and go back to normal is highly variable. So some studies say within 3 days of eating your normal diet, you can bounce back. And then I know from personal relationships and personal anecdotes, some people don't recover for a year or more. I think it's all contingent upon what is happening at the present time. If you have, your gallbladder removed, for example, you get antibiotics once, And then you kind of go back to eating what you were eating before. Maybe you eat more comfortably now. Um, that is a very kind of low risk, one dose, kind of minor surgery situation. But if your nervous system is really activated, maybe you just got diagnosed with breast cancer and now you need a breast biopsy. So that's a surgery. And then maybe you need a, bilateral mastectomy. Then maybe you need reconstruction. So repeated surgeries, a stressful situation. Again, all of those things are going to impact your gut. And that means that your bowel might have a harder time recovering from something like that. Ibuprofen, NSAIDs, Aleve, naproxen, etc. Those medicines poke holes in that mucus lining. And so this is another mechanism to ulcers. And when people are warned against taking NSAIDs, they're usually quoted, okay, this will increase your risk of stomach ulcers. But the reality is those micro ulcerations are occurring throughout the entire small intestine. And this has been studied with endoscopy and colonoscopy and even biopsies in rats. So if you take any second thing away from this presentation, it is please stop using NSAIDs. They are not good for your gut at all. Viruses too, okay? So right now, to date, there just isn't a lot of information yet about the role of viruses. However, what we do know is that the viruses in your gut, part of your gut microbiome, they actually outnumber your bacteria by about a power of 3, which is a pretty exponential amount. The other thing that has been demonstrated is that while you have relatively few numbers of bacteria present at birth, you have a considerable number of these bacterial phages. A bacteriophage is a specific type of non-threatening virus that is in the body. And so these phages interact with the bacteria that you're now going to be making contact with. They also interact with your immune system. And the other thing that's really fascinating to me is that viruses and bacteria, they can just share genes all the time. So because a life cycle of bacteria is somewhere between 20 and 30 seconds, they are constantly evolving. And sometimes they're evolving so quickly that even in laboratory settings, we're kind of making new discoveries about new different types of bacteria. And I think what's happening is we're actually seeing this like evolution, which is pretty fascinating. So we have the highest number of bacteriophages when we're born. As we age, that number gets less and less and less. And I think that also speaks to the possibility that, again, as we develop, as our immune system gets kind of set in, is that our internal environment gets kind of decided, then we don't really maybe need this evolutionary kind of mechanism anymore. These are just thoughts. I actually don't know. But as more virus and phage information comes out, I imagine this whole coronavirus situation is going to put a lot of people very interested in virology. And I can't wait to see what comes out about the virome. So here's some scenarios of healthy kind of gut and maturation versus maybe an unhealthy kind of gut scenario. And remember, these are from birth situations and then how these different scenarios can add up. So your mother had no dysbiosis at all. Remember, dysbiosis means that your gut microbiome isn't perfectly healthy for you. It's so easy to get dysbiosis. So this is a unicorn here on the left that we're talking about. She had a really healthy diet. She exercised. She slept great. She had no stress. She had a child born at full term, vaginal, no complications. The kid had no antibiotics in early childhood. They had exposure to pets. They played outside in the dirt. And this kid, breastfed till 2 years of life and then ate a variety of foods, wasn't a picky eater. Healthiest person. Okay, literally, this is a unicorn. I don't know anybody who has this background. But then this other scenario, which again is becoming all too common, emergency C-section, preterm delivery. And you can imagine maybe mother didn't have a perfect gut. Maybe she was one of those that just had a dental cavity or a urinary tract infection during pregnancy. And that stress is what got that into the placenta. formula fed because mom's milk didn't come in, or because in the 80s, it was actually more astute, more esteemed to formula feed your baby. Frequent infections as a child, frequent upper respiratory tract infections, antibiotic use, prescribed antacids for spitting up frequently. I've actually heard of pediatricians prescribing antacids for little babies. And then bloody stools as young child, or constipation and lots of food allergies. Um, so yeah, these are just scenarios, food for thought. So what happens when we have increased intestinal permeability? And so I just find that infographics tell the whole story. So a lot of pictures here. But so here on the left side, where the gut isn't so red, this is a healthy gut. You have well digested vitamins, minerals, little food particles, but remember they're just that single pearl. And then, of course, we're constantly eating food from our environment. We're making contact with, we're picking up bacteria all the time, picking up new viruses all the time. But because we have that protective mucus layer, because we have healthy commensals what live in you, we have healthy microbiome that are always kind of looking out for us, regulating pH, um, quorum sensing and cross talking to each other. We don't have as much transcellular route, right? We have healthy tight junctions. All of these well digested particles are then being taken up to the bloodstream. Our immune system doesn't need to react against them because it recognizes them as important to our body. And everything's hunky dory. But if we have an unhealthy mucus layer, and we're taking medications that do that, like ibuprofen. We have stress. Now, in the fourth lecture, I will talk specifically about stress on the gut. There's a lot of really fascinating research on that. So then you get these broken cells, and then you get these bacteria and these undigested food particles, again, interacting with our immune system, to our immune system is now creating chemical signatures of reactivity. And this is what is presumed to be the cause of things like arthritis or even joint pain. Now, while I recognize there is a metabolic or digestive health component to joint pain, there is just as much a mental, emotional, mindfulness, trauma component to pain and to disease. And so that's really what Level Guts and Primordial Paradigm is about. It's about connecting the two dots from the bottom up, the gut, to the brain, and from the brain and the experience back down, so that our two systems can really get into coherence and talk to each other. And again, the gut-brain axis, which is the whole crux of my personal and professional joy, um, it's just that it's a two-lane street. Okay, so when stress comes into the brain, um, anxiety. What is anxiety? Is anxiety a name or a disorder, or is it actual physiological phenomenon that can be intervened upon and optimized, because now we understand the source of our anxiety, and we also understand the steps we need to take to kind of act upon it. All right, I love, love, love biochemistry. And I just wanted to show you guys the pathway here. If there's any biochemistry nerds, the TCA cycle is something that our bodies do all the time. Every single cell does this. Most bacterial cells do this. And it's how we take a molecule of glucose or sugar and then what we do to kind of make out of it. And from the TCA cycle is where we get a lot of our other enzymes or cofactors. And so GABA, which is kind of off screen here, but GABA, this is the neurotransmitter that helps us regulate a calm state. And glutamate, I bring this up because glutamate is sold as a dietary supplement, L-glutamate right here, a dietary supplement. And weightlifters take it because it's a building block protein, but also it's been helpful for people who are trying to heal leaky gut. And again, I bring it up because it's the precursor, the cofactor to GABA. And so glutamate is also part of the cellular structure to, again, the tight junctions and the integrity of the gut wall. So L-glutamate, GABA. And then serotonin. So serotonin comes from the amino acid tryptophan. Tryptophan is what makes you sleepy after eating a turkey. It's also what makes you happy from eating a banana. Again, these are kind of those media headlines and buzzwords that are often thrown around when you see these articles and stuff. But tryptophan is very high in bananas and it's also high in turkey, but you can get tryptophan from many other different foods too. These are amino acids, which is why protein is a revered food constituent. However, keep in mind that if you are vegan or vegetarian, you can get your amino acids from plants. So plants have amino acids as well. But tryptophan being the amino acid precursor, and then 5-hydroxytryptophan, 5-HTP. This is also sold as a supplement. It's a supplement that people can take to induce a state of well-being. Again, it's the precursor to serotonin. People also take this to induce sleep. So without serotonin, which is known as the happiness hormone, we really can't have successful sleep. But again, I don't want to tell you guys this information so you think you need a supplement. It is made by the gut bacteria. And so, really, just having healthy digestion, having enough mindfulness and attention to your body so that you can be relaxed into eating, right? Really get that parasympathetic nervous system going. And then you can be able to digest more fiber. You're going to be feeding your body and feeding your gut all the serotonin that you need. And you'll be sleeping better and you'll be regulating your emotions better, at least I hope. Okay, so I don't know what time it is, but I think I have talked enough. I would like to open this up for a Q&A now. And if Facebook Live is working, which I have no idea, I can't see your questions. So you can just write them somewhere. I'm sure I'll see it eventually. And then while you guys are thinking about questions you might have, I just want to go over what is going to be coming next. So on Friday, May 8th at 8 p.m., this is the new time in Pacific time, I'm going to be doing part 3. And part 3 is another lecture environment just like this, where we go a deep dive into the autonomic nervous system. And really, I'm going to be highlighting the work of Stephen Porges, the work of Peter Levine, who are both PhDs and psychologists, and have really done an awesome job explaining how our autonomic nervous system is really wired for safety. And again, that's me connecting how we have to get our body into parasympathetic state in order to properly be digesting our food and having a healthy mucus layer. So that goes more into the autonomic nervous system. And then the fourth part, we're going to be connecting how the autonomic nervous system and the gut kind of relate in more depth. So really these first 2 lectures, we're kind of laying down that foundation. And again, part 4 is going to kind of be where the rubber meets the road. Where does the autonomic nervous system and that gut really meet? Okay, so here we go. We got some questions. How much is too much of the medications you mentioned, like ibuprofen? Any. And that is a shock for people to hear, literally any. So it's the frequency of your use, it's not the dose. The medicine itself, and I took the slide off. I took the slide off of this presentation, but it's called a prostaglandin inhibitor. And prostaglandins are what make the mucus layer of our smooth muscle in the body. So you have prostaglandins that affect the uterus and that contractility. You have prostaglandins that affect the bowel, and that's what caused the bowel to kind of empty and move. So literally, it's any dose. It's the frequency. So, you know, Ibuprofen is a fantastic drug for when you have pain. Absolutely. It'll just take it away, right? And so I don't say that, you don't ever take it. I mean, I think if I were to break something, sprain something, cut something, burn something, use it acutely. Don't use it chronically. And I think you'll be much, much better off. So daily use, weekly use is not advised, but using it kind of as a one-off. Oh, I just hurt myself. It's a fantastic pain reliever. It just has a lot of consequences. Okay, do you have any non-dairy probiotic recommendations? So there's all sorts of plant-based yogurts out there now. There's also probiotic capsules that are non-dairy. There's coconut kefir or water kefir, Saccharomyces cerevisiae or Saccharomyces boulardii, which comes from kombucha typically, or also yeast, like in beer, sourdough, all those things. So I would just do a good old fashioned Google search and find whichever one you like. Typically, though, and again, it kind of just depends on at what stage of development you were when you first developed cross reactivity to dairy. So I don't know, but most probiotic capsules, even if they are dairy derived, you're still going to do okay with it. So lactobacillus has lacto in it because it typically eats lactose the best. Usually what's happening when they have those non-dairy products, they're still culturing lactobacillus. So they're still culturing something that fed off of that and then adding it to it afterwards. So my guess is just experiment. And as long as you're not eating straight yogurt or kefir, you're probably going to be fine. Um, Great. Okay, your opinion on dairy products, not fermented for adults. Um, so uh, it's interesting because the nutritional literature has been so skewed by the dairy industry for a long time that it's hard to trust like the origin of those studies. There is lots of good evidence that the calcium and the protein, the whey, there's these different constituents of dairy that is fine for humans. There's also a layer of modern agricultural practices, how cows are fed, how cows are treated, how they're milked, how many antibiotics are cows given, what are they fed. So those are the only strong opinions I have against dairy, is all of those things. um, I otherwise think that most humans, right? Not most humans, I shouldn't say that. I'm a white person with European descent. So what my context is that European descended folk have been eating dairy for a very, very long time. India has been consuming dairy products for a very long time. But you look at Asian populations, they haven't. You look at African populations, they haven't. Native North Americans, we're not consuming milk. So I also think that there's something to understand or appreciate about your genetic ancestry, and how long has that lineage been consuming those foods. So I think we're all different. As a man, there's also pretty significant data suggesting that dairy consumption increases your risk of prostate cancer. So again, I don't know. I can tell you what I personally do. I personally largely only consume fermented dairy, and I do it pretty regularly. But again, I also recognize that that's something that works for my body. So if you're curious and want to try going without, then no harm, no foul. You can get calcium from many other foods out there. Leafy greens are a really good example. Um, so yeah, don't buy into the old milk mustache campaign. um, that we don't all have to drink milk to be healthy. Okay, inulin is a new term to me. Do we get this from food? Yes, you do get it from milk. Or, sorry, I read a different question. You don't get inulin from milk. You do get it from food. It again, yacon, which was a new vegetable to me as of recently, artichokes. Inulin's actually really it's the fiber and the sweetness when you cook it present in onions, leeks, and garlic. So, eating those three foods, which I do routinely, they're delicious, um, is another way to just keep thinking, oh, prebiotics, oh, good, I'm feeding my gut. This is great. So yes. Also, you can get it in supplement form. So I have a 3-year-old, and my 3-year-old doesn't eat her leafy green vegetables as much as I would like her to. I can get her to eat a little bit of broccoli and maybe a roasted carrot every now and then. But it's kind of a struggle. So I tend to fortify a lot of things with inulin for her. And again, my desire to do that comes from that literature showing that infants fed formula supplemented with inulin had similar immune system and bacterial diversity trajectories as those who were breastfed. So again, inulin's a win for me. Okay. If our gut is sending signals to our brains, are we aware of these signals as hunger, thirst, craving a particular food? Um, Yeah, definitely. So all of those things are hormonally driven. And again, I did a lot of medical uh, rhetoric and all the different infographics. I mean, you learned a lot about the immune system today. But there's hormones and peptides, which is just like a protein chain. Again, these are just chemical messages for the body. But hunger is a combination of ghrelin, which tells us like we're hungry. But then there's also a combination of hormones in the gut that tell us we're satisfied and we're not hungry. And again, there's a biological hunger, there's a biological fullness, there's a biological satisfied. Um, Cravings can also be biological because sometimes our body doesn't get enough iron. So we start eating weird things or chewing on things. So, yeah, cravings, I think it's just important, again, that we can tune down the noise. There's so much noise because of all the commercialization and the media and this like always being sold something. We're being sold a weight loss diet or trick. We're being sold an agenda. Everybody's got an agenda. So I think when we can really just dial in what our individual needs are, you're going to really bring awareness to what those signals are. Some of those signals you may not perceive, like one bacteria telling another bacteria to die, one bacteria telling another bacteria to make this postbiotic. Again, I'm kind of personifying it. We don't really have it all figured out. We just know that there's this chemical soup, and they all seem to really have a collective consciousness, which is pretty wild. So here's another question. What do you think about raw milk? If I had my way, I would absolutely only use raw milk um, if I could. And for a while there, after my daughter was born, knew that she loved milk, and milk was served at daycare and all the above. But yeah, I was paying $16 a gallon to get my hands on raw Guernsey cow milk. Um, I think raw milk's fine. Again, you run the theoretical risk of drinking something sour and getting some sort of foodborne illness like listeria, but you can get listeria from also eating raw cheeses. Um, I don't necessarily agree that milk is a superfood and we need it every day, but I think from an evolutionary standpoint, having a cow in your own backyard, which was just part of a way of life, or your community cow and everybody's milking it. Milk used to be raw when it was delivered by the milkman in those glass bottles on our grandparents' steps. So it was really this agricultural push to then mass produce this stuff that then it became, I think, a food service health and safety risk. So yeah, I don't really think any particular food is horrible. You're gonna learn that from me. I'm not I'm not trying to sell you a diet or sell you a way of being. If you want to be keto, great. If you want to be paleo, awesome. If you want to go Whole30, cool. I think just if we can listen to our bodies and then have flexibility, knowing that seasonally or day to day, something might sound good, something might feel good. Um, Seasonality is another thing to really pay really close attention to. So yeah, if you can get your hands on raw milk, give it a shot. Um, I don't think it's going to make you an Olympian athlete, but you can definitely try it. I'm not sure if I missed this. This is a question, but did you talk about reflux? I haven't officially talked about reflux. That could probably be its own separate webinar because reflux is a combination of what is our autonomic nervous system doing? How much stomach acid am I producing? What is my nervous system state dictating those things? And then what am I eating and how am I eating it? More often than not, I hear the story of eating food too rich for them. Um, and you also have to take into consideration that not all acid reflux is simply eating the wrong things or making too much stomach acid. In fact, it's rarely that you make too much stomach acid. So oftentimes there's an anatomical cause. Um, so yeah, acid reflux is kind of a bigger topic. Typically though, if you slow down, eat smaller meals at night, don't lay down before, within 3 to 4 hours. Within 4 hours, your stomach should be completely empty. And really just, yeah, slow down. Don't eat and drink at the same time if you have acid reflux. By just eating and separating liquids away, that actually might help. Um, and then, yeah, I guess we should continue that conversation, Julie, because it's such an individual thing. But no processed food, no fast food, pizza, tomato sauce, rich stuff. If you layer on carbohydrates plus fat, plus protein, it's kind of too much. It's kind of too much for your stomach to handle at one time. But if you're doing everything right, you think from a diet perspective, and you're still having reflux, then it likely could be an anatomical issue. How does wine and beer, those great fermented beverages, affect the gut microbiome? Ooh, Mary, that is such a good question. And I need to look into that. I know that there has been some research on it. And again, I've only read the headlines. I think it depends on the frequency. I've been in and out of conversations with my husband about, I want to know the metabolite profile of beer and wine. And the metabolite profile is much different than what we talk about from like fermented food. Um, but yeah, I know there's a connection there somewhere. In fact, I would argue that that's probably the perceived benefit that longitudinal studies have shown from drinking 1 glass of wine or beer for women and 2 glasses of wine or beer for men. It probably does come from the byproducts of fermentation. In general, it always comes down to quantity and in frequency, just like with the ibuprofen and the frequency. I think the frequency of and the quantity of alcohol production or consumption, because if the liver is now having some sort of biochemical effect, like toxicity from alcohol, then that is going to affect all of those other quorum sensing, metabolite processing factors. In fact, that 5-HTP, or that precursor to serotonin in that tryptophan pathway, is now linked to every single kind of metabolic disease in and out of the liver. In fact, I read a paper recently where the authors were actually proposing making a serotonin antagonist or a serotonin blocker as a treatment for obesity. Could you imagine taking a drug that depleted you of serotonin? That would be like a depressant inducing medication. No thanks. I kind of laughed at the authors for that. I was this close to writing a letter to their editor, but yeah, so it does affect it. That's all I can really say, but I will look into that for next time. So acid reflux and beer and wine coming up. Okay, Marianne, can all the negative things that have occurred even before birth be undone through changes in the diet now? The short answer, Marianne, is yes, because of epigenetics. So, epigenetics is the ability for our bodies, through sensing our environment, to turn on genes or turn them off. And look that up. Epigenetics, EPIGENETICS, epigenetics. Epigenetics is really kind of the nuts and bolts to why diet and lifestyle matter so much. I have also tested my genome. And, I have respecters for Alzheimer's, I have respecters for metabolic diseases and obesity. And, I also don't necessarily know if I can trust those genetic tests or not. But it's interesting because when you sample a lot of people and you start to recognize these little signatures of microbiome similarities, it's not that the people are exactly similar in their body habitus, in their personality, in all of those things. So, or in their health and disease states. So, yes, it can be undone, but does that mean it's easy? No, definitely not easy. And what we see out there through maybe you personally or your loved ones is that some people struggle harder than others. And again, I think my approach, which is, can we acknowledge how the nervous system, can we acknowledge how all these events that have happened to us have shaped why we're different? And just acknowledging why and maybe how, and then developing self-love and acceptance and kind of new insights for us as individuals can really help each one of us find our own path to health. That was a really long-winded answer there. I don't even know if I answered it. Epigenetics. Bruce Lipton. Yes. Yes. Good old Brucey. Yeah. Epigenetics. Yeah. It's really, really powerful stuff. Yep. All right. Oh my gosh. It's already 9:20. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight and for participating. I really appreciate it. And I will make this recording live and available in just a day or two, and I'll share that with you in an email. Feel free to forward this on to your friends. I'm going to keep going, and we will hold on, got a chat. Let's see if we can answer the chat. Oh, we got the thank you. Yep, okay, great. We already answered those questions. Yes, thank you. You guys have a good night. Goodbye.